Murder and Such contains true stories about murders, the macabre, true crime, serial killers, and other dark subject matter. This includes adult themes, explicit language, descriptions of gore, violence, and other information provided by news articles, witness testimony, and public record. Murder and Such is not intended for all audiences, and although warnings will be set in place, listener discretion is still advised.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Murder and Such. My name is Hunter, and I thank you for being with me for this episode. Speaking of which, this episode will be incredibly troubling and very hard to listen to. It's not necessarily filled with gore, but this one was incredibly hard for me to research. But before I get into it, I want to do my Patreon shoutouts. So a thank you to the wonderful Brooke Vanderford for jumping onto the Patreon page, and I've known her because she always has a litany of excellent true crime podcasts for everybody to listen to, and somehow she found my show. And another poor bastard who found my show is a guy by the name of Ian Welglars, and for some reason he also decided to jump onto the Patreon page and donate to the show. So thank you so much for your donation, Ian. I also want to thank Jax Dorian, Angel Renee, Ashley Collier, and Lacey Velasquez for upping their pledge and jumping on to the executive producer tier. You will all be getting a shout out at the end of each and every episode. Now if you'd like to join them and help fund the back end of the show, get discounts on merchandise, and exclusive Richard Chase stickers, you can find that link at patreon.com/murderandsuch, and you can donate for just $1 an episode. So thank you to all of my incredible patrons for keeping this shit show afloat, and thank you for tuning into this case. Now let's start diving into this one. I've brought up domestic abuse cases before, such as when I did a 2-part series on the As I Lay Dying frontman, Tim Lambesis, and a small update to that case is that one of Tim's most ardent critics, guitarist Nick Hippa, he actually has now left the band. And there's not much to say about it right now, as it's very recent, but to be honest, for the sake of all persons involved, and I hope it didn't have anything to do with Tim as a whole, and he's still on a better track to keeping his word, his faith, and his character at the forefront. But domestic abuse is horrible. I can't quite find a word that fully encapsulates how terrifying, tragic, and horrendous the domestic violence truly is. It can come in many shapes and forms, and not just affect a two-partner scenario. It can be an aggressor against a spouse or a partner, children, parents, or a multitude of other people within their four walls. According to WorldPopulationReview.com, the highest percentage of states in America that have experienced domestic violence are in Alaska and 2 others. And the article states, Alaska is notorious for violent crime and has the highest overall crime rate in the country. Nearly 50% of all English-speaking adult women in Alaska have experienced intimate partner or sexual violence in their lifetime. The state's rate of sexual assault is 161.9 incidents per 100,000 people, nearly 4 times the national rate. Alaska also has the highest homicide rate for female victims killed by a male perpetrator. The second highest is Oklahoma, where about 49.1% of Oklahoma women and about 40.7% of Oklahoma men experience domestic violence in their lifetimes, including an intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner rape, or intimate partner stalking. Oklahoma ranks 3rd in the U.S. for the number of women killed by men in single-victim, single-offender homicides. And the third one is Nevada. Nevada has the 5th highest overall crime rate in the United States. For many years, Nevada was ranked first for domestic violence fatalities and ranked 3rd in 2014. About 48.1% of Nevada women and about 30.9% of Nevada men experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. In 2014, domestic violence services were contacted 65,026 times. But domestic abuse isn't just physical violence, though. Emotional and mental abuse are also forms of abuse. Definitions of abuse and domestic violence can be confusing. Many researchers have used physical violence resulting in a bodily injury as a primary definition, yet it is clear that for many of the victims of domestic violence, psychological and emotional abuse is at least as harmful, if not more so, than physical abuse. Forms of emotional abuse can include humiliating partners in private or public, gaslighting or crazy-making, destroying furniture, punching holes in walls or breaking appliances, taking car keys, their cell phone, and other means of communication away, harassing partners about imagined affairs, manipulating partners with lies and contradictions, ridiculing or insulting valued beliefs, religion, race, heritage, or class, withholding approval, appreciation, or affection as punishment, as well as others. And abuse is abuse no matter how you look at it. But even with physical abuse, there's usually a much more cut and dry form of it, such as pushing, kicking, slapping, punching or scratching, throwing objects at or near a partner, subjecting someone to reckless driving, abuse that results in lacerations, broken bones, internal injuries, or miscarriage, non-consensual rough play like martial arts, MMA, or self-defense techniques, and the one that everyone can just about imagine, which is murder. Keep in mind, this is not all forms of abuse. Another form is sexual abuse, such as forcing a partner to strip, forcing a partner into sex work activities and prostitution, using a sexual derogatory name, birth control sabotage, forcing a partner to watch pornography, subjecting the partner to unwanted touching, non-consensually biting, pinching, or hurting a partner with objects during sex, and sexually abusing or raping their partner. But as of right now, partners of abuse are facing a much more serious and grave time, especially considering the state of the country during the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people have lost their jobs or they're working from home, and if there's abuse going on at home and the partner and abuser are spending much more time together without the reprieve of going to work or being in lockdown, the rates of a domestic abuse situation have increased significantly. In an article posted to the website Psychology Today on May 29th of 2020, attorney Macklin Stanley, who has a master's in developmental psychology from Harvard's Graduate School of Education, had stated that a lot of it has to do with the economic anxiety and stress, as those who lose their jobs tend to be much more on edge. Then, if you throw in different substances like alcohol or extended drug usage, and being surrounded by the same environment on a constant basis can make people go stir crazy. Macklin stated, quote, "With workplaces closed, visits to family and friends discouraged, and even public parks off limit, social isolation has become government sanctioned. Unfortunately, social isolation is one of the most common tactics employed by perpetrators of IPV, or intimate partner violence. By isolating victims from friends, family, and outside contact, abusers are able to assert control over their victim's entire environment. Social isolation can also lead to the normalization of abuse and allow abusers to more easily engage in gaslighting techniques. Severe and persistent isolation can cause victims to rely solely on their abusers to define a sense of reality, which feeds into a cycle of abuse that is very difficult to escape." End quote. Times aren't great right now. With COVID still rearing its ugly head, the fear of the unknown is very much alive and well. But as I said in the Tim Lambesis episode, there is help out there. Fear plays a horrible mind trick on you. You feel like you're hopeless, you live in fear, you don't know whether or not you're doing something right or wrong, but that doesn't mitigate the fear. But help is there. The Hotline.org is the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which has their primary goal is to support survivors 24/7. And although COVID-19 is still raging on, claiming the lives of nearly 1,000 people per day in the United States, they've still got their professional staff working remotely to ensure services and continue to support survivors. In the Tim Lambesis episode, I said that you could contact them at thehotline.org, but they have also gotten another way. They've partnered with loveisrespect.org, and they have a text feature now as well. Of course, if you're in dire circumstances, you should absolutely call 911 to get emergency service sent to your house. But if you need to contact them, their phone number is 1-800-799-7233, and their website is thehotline.org and loveisrespect.org, where they do have an online chat feature that's available 24/7. But you can also text "Love Is," all one word, to 1-866-331-9474 to get text assistance if you are unable to talk on the phone. You are not alone. You deserve safety and love. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're unsure or you feel unsafe, you should definitely reach out to these people. And although the demographic for true crime podcasts is almost unanimously women, 1 in 4 men also will suffer from intimate partner violence in their lifetime. So as someone who has also been physically and emotionally abused in a relationship, trust me guys, there's help for you too. And it's never shameful to ask for help. Abuse is abuse, any way you look at it, and nobody should have to fear for their life, for their own safety and security, ever in their lifetime. Help is there. So with this particular case, I wouldn't feel right if I didn't mention all of the domestic violence hotlines and statistics, because what happened in this case has helped to enact stricter punishments, harsher sentences, and can keep the victims of abuse safer than they were before. But I'm going to start getting into it. As always, my name is Hunter, and you're listening to Murder and Such. And this is episode 69, Judy Malinowski. Judith Ann Malinowski was born on August 26th of 1983. I will be omitting her parents' last names, but her mother was named Bonnie, and her father, who is now deceased, was named Thomas. Growing up in the Columbus, Ohio area, she was an incredibly active child and teenager. She attended the New Albany High School and graduated with the class of 2001. Judy was popular, intelligent, smart, and was absolutely captivating, both in her heart and in her looks. So much that she was crowned the Miss New Albany Homecoming Queen, and her beauty was on parallel with her heart and the love that she had for everyone. She loved everyone unconditionally and with no hesitation. Everybody knew who Judy was, and they flocked to her like moths to a flame. Her love and spirit and humor was infectious, to say the least. So when she enrolled at Ohio State University after her high school graduation, for what she was studying, I really couldn't find a source on that one. But Ohio State is quite possibly the biggest college in all of Ohio, and getting in is honestly a very big deal to a lot of people. But unfortunately, in early 2005, Judy had become diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she underwent treatment for it. According to Healthline.com, ovarian cancer affects nearly 1 in 78 women, and there is roughly 21,000 diagnoses of ovarian cancer each year. Roughly 1 in 108, or 14,000 women with the diagnosis, actually lose their lives. But Judy went through the operation that she needed, and she was declared cancer-free and returned to her job working in customer service. But nearly 15 months later, she fell into the 70% of women where the cancer can actually come back. Judy was diagnosed again with ovarian cancer, and after she had 2 daughters, she had decided to undergo a full hysterectomy. This operation unfortunately did not go as planned, and Judy had been diagnosed with chronic pain from a complication that resulted from the surgery. Like most doctors, they will write a prescription to help her curb the pain and leave the patient addicted to those medications. When Judy was 27, she was written prescriptions for OxyContin and Percocet. OxyContin is a synthetic opiate drug that helps to relieve pain. While Percocet is not entirely an opiate, it interacts in the same specific opioid receptors of the brain and provides relief, relaxation, and feelings of euphoria. But those drugs are also incredibly addictive. Because while it's good to make someone's pain go away, the pharmaceutical companies who manufacture these sorts of drugs can keep their reoccurring customer base coming back. There was a lawsuit against the manufacturer of OxyContin, which was finally settled in 2019 due to the nature of their marketing of the drug and the extreme addictiveness of the prescription itself. However, Judy had lost her insurance coverage, and there was no way for her to pay to get the medication that helped alleviate her pain. So unfortunately, she had become addicted to another opioid known as heroin. She struggled with this addiction for many, many years, and there were times that she had even dabbled with crack cocaine. Now, she started dating Michael Slater in April of 2015, and Judy and Michael knew each other through Judy's estranged husband having fathered a child with one of her friends before meeting Judy, and that friend of hers had introduced Michael to Judy. Judy and her husband were estranged as Judy had learned in 2007 that her husband had been cheating on her. The person who had brought this information to Judy was none other than Michael Slater. To an extent, Michael had somewhat of an infatuation with Judy and had professed his feelings to her copious amounts of times, but Judy didn't accept his advances as he was dating other friends of hers. At the time, Judy was also pregnant with her younger daughter, so she didn't want anything physical to do with Michael. Now, I do want to talk about what kind of a guy Michael Slater was. He was convicted of multiple crimes throughout his pathetic existence. Here is a little rundown of Michael Slater's criminal history. In 1994, he was charged with receiving stolen property. In 1999, he was charged with 2 counts of sexual battery and 1 count of kidnapping. In 2000, he was charged with aggravated burglary. In 2003, he was charged with kidnapping and menacing by stalking. In 2003, he was charged with failure to provide the notice of a change of address because, due to his charges of sexual assault, he was a registered sex offender. In 2007, he was charged with failure to comply with an order or signal of a police officer. In 2007, Once again, failure to provide notice of a change of address. And in 2008, he was charged with theft and passing of bad checks. His original sentence was 18 months in prison. So you would think with a rap sheet as bad as his is, he would have done his damnedest to keep his ass out of jail. Well, he actually didn't get arrested again for another 8 years and even served out his sentence. So, good for you, Michael. In 2014 is when Judy and Michael had reconnected after his prison sentence, where he sent her a message on Facebook trying to hang out with her. Although at the time, Michael was still somewhat involved with the opioid circle upon release. Michael couldn't keep his nose clean from the whole drug circle after he had gotten out, and he managed to pass any drug tests that they had conducted on him as part of his parole. Judy had managed to actually get clean and moved up to Albany into an apartment and had regained custody of her 2 daughters. At the time, Judy was living off of Social Security due to her being disabled from the pain that her hysterectomy had caused her, and she was battling a litany of mental health issues from her past. But she was making nearly enough to cover all expenses, and her mother would help out with any additional bills or necessities that she could. Judy had flipped the switch, and she was on the right track, because she had known of people who had overdosed on heroin and passed away. But Judy wanted better. Now, get ready, kids, because I'm about to go on my good old-fashioned soapbox for a minute and tell you about drug addiction. Buckle in, because honestly, to me, it's worth it. So if you look at drugabuse.com, the national statistics have only shown that heroin overdoses have increased over time. In 2010, it was stated that 38,329 people had died of drug overdoses amongst all ages and all drugs. But in 2010, it was roughly 21,088 people who had died of opioid overdoses. But if you fast forward 8 years, the number has become staggeringly higher. In 2018, it was reported that 67,367 had died of drug overdoses amongst all genders and ages and all drugs. But 46,802 of them were opioid related. Heroin, fentanyl, and other opioids are becoming much more prominent, and the drug war against drug usage is definitely losing. Something that I've said in prior episodes is that the biggest drug dealers are the ones that wear lab coats. Sure, heroin dealers need to be either shot in the fucking face or brought to justice, but with the insurance system that we have, the astronomical prices that prescription medications can cost, and the addictiveness of those prescription medications such as Oxycontin, oxycodone, Percocet, hydrocodone, and all of those can be extremely addicting. And when you cut off the apply to an opioid medication to someone or limit the amount that they can have after they've already become hooked, that can lead to them finding street drugs to either bring back the sensation or just let the person find comfort. The pharmaceutical industries only care about making their bottom dollar on each pill sold. I will also let you know that the OxyContin manufacturer, Purdue Pharma, the CEO, which is the Sackler family, is worth $14 billion as of a 2016 Forbes article had been posted. These people profit from the addiction and deaths of others. So just remember that when somebody is addicted to heroin, you may not know how they got there, but drug addiction is incredibly serious, and we should be working harder to get someone help rather than kick downward on someone with an addiction like people tend to do. If you know someone who may be struggling with addiction, you can contact the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration National Helpline, which is free and confidential and available 24/7 all year round for people suffering from drug addiction. You can find that website at samhsa.gov, or their phone number is 1-800-622-HELP in the United States. In the UK, you can go to uk-rehab.com, or the phone number is 02038 155 610. And in Australia, the website is healthdirect.gov.au, and their phone number is 1300 368 186. If you or someone you love needs the help, time is of the utmost importance, and there will always be people there to help save your life or the life of someone that you love. There is my soapbox. Soapbox over. But when it comes to Judy, she had gotten the help and is not one to be kicked down on. Judy did not want to become a part of the statistic that I just read to you. She was clean and on a better life, not just for herself, but also for her family and her 2 daughters. But with addiction, it takes a lot of dedication and strength to keep yourself sober and clean. Mouth breathers, and I do not say that term loosely, will always just think that, oh, they just want to do drugs to get high. Well, no. Manufactured drugs such as methamphetamines, painkillers, opioids, and other addictive substances are designed to make someone feel euphoric, a sense of weightlessness, and blissful. Meanwhile, they're also manufactured to keep someone addicted to them and keep them coming back for more. The human brain is an inherently fragile organ. Okay, think of it this way. You ever wake up after a long nap or a night's sleep, and you know that feeling when you extend your arms and legs and stretch out, and how incredibly relaxing it feels? Or, hell, we've all either had sex or masturbate. Yeah, we're adults here, so if you're not an adult listening to this podcast, I'm gonna fucking tell your parents on you. But the climactic feel of an orgasm, one of the best feelings in the world. Now, what if you could have those feelings for an extended amount of time, possibly even hours at a time? What if your whole body felt like that long stretch or intense orgasm whenever you wanted it to? Your brain is wired to believe that it feels good, so you want to do it. Drugs have the same effect. But as a stretch can be a fleeting feeling, you get up, you go wash your ass in the shower, you go to work. Drugs act as a ratchet strap to hold you down to the bed and want nothing more than to lay there and keep stretching, keep yawning, and be in this state of complete and utter bliss. So much that you'll go through great lengths to get those feelings and that sense of euphoria. That's how bad addiction can actually be. And unfortunately, people do relapse. Judy again found herself in the death grip of heroin, but with Michael's help, her addiction was easy to feed. Judy started using heroin again. At first, she was petitioning her mother for money to help her get the fix that she needed. But then she physically started showing the signs that she was using again, and her mother had to make the decision to cut her off as her relapse violated an agreement that she had with her mother, and she would not be the person to feed her addiction. Michael had worked on a construction team to help make the ends meet, but he also still had his infatuation with Judy and started buying heroin almost every single day for Judy. But Michael was not a heroin user. But as he wasn't a heroin user, he was most definitely a domestic abuser. There was a period where Michael was physically abusing, hitting, and punching Judy. But almost every time they met up, it would result in Michael verbally abusing the living hell out of Judy. Screaming at her, calling her names, telling her she was nothing short of a heroin junkie, but Michael was the only person that could help her with her addiction. Judy was an addict, but that didn't make her any less of a human being. I know that people who listen to the show don't fully agree with my political beliefs or my social commentary, but addiction is a mental health disorder. These drugs hit the synapses that make them addictive, and the after effects of using the drugs are very grim. Those include a loss of self-control, physical degradation, infections, bloodshot eyes, irritability and mood swings, anxiety, agitation, trouble in interpersonal relationships, decreased motivation, blackouts, loss of memory, lethargy, hallucinations, and even death. But as drugs hit the right synapses of the brain to make someone feel good or euphoric, it also degrades other parts of the brain that normally function to rationalize someone's behavior, conscience, or mental composure. As someone who takes medication for depression and anxiety, I know what being brain sick feels like. Your stomach gets sick, your lungs get sick, your brain is just as much an organ as the rest and can also get sick. Like I said before, people who kick down on addicts to make themselves feel better about themselves are kind of fucking assholes and extremely abhorrent. So, don't be a dick, because just looking at somebody, you don't know their personal experiences or the journey that they're currently on. As one of my favorite comedians has said, Patton Oswalt, it's chaos. Be kind. But in Judy's case, it wasn't just being in an abusive relationship, but she also had a chemical reason of why she was still in that relationship. She needed either her drugs or she needed to get help. And for a while, in the summer of 2015, Judy was prescribed Suboxone, a drug that is used to treat opiate addiction. But as the insurance industry sucks in America, Suboxone can range from $150 to $500 depending on the strength of the drug when you don't have insurance. So it's honestly fucking expensive, and heroin or other opiates may be cheaper. It's not like she didn't want to get help. She obviously did, but she kept finding herself stopped by various roadblocks. The next one to come was one that involved her mother. The lease on Judy's apartment was not in her name, it was in her mother's name. And her mother had come to the apartment one time because Michael and Judy had gotten into an altercation and Judy just wanted him to leave, in which Michael, the convicted felon, had left for the night but came back day after day after day. He stood in the way of her trying to get treatment as well, because if she had gotten the treatment that she needed, she wouldn't need him anymore. He felt like he was going to lose her as the only source of help that was he acted as her boyfriend and her dealer. He held power over her and fed her addiction just to keep a grasp on her. So Michael had moved all of Judy's belongings out of her apartment and put them into storage. Then Judy was practically forced to live out of hotels or other various areas with Michael. There was a time where Judy had taken a car and drove out to a hotel to avoid Michael hitting her. She was out there for about 5 days, and she was using at the time. Michael had found out a way to track her through her cell phone. And this was something that Judy had tried to bring up to the police as she was actively trying to avoid him, but the police had said that it was something that they could not prove, so there was no way to get a restraining order against him or anything of that sort. So Mike had used her phone to track her location and found out exactly where she was. And that's going to bring us up to August 1st of 2015. Judy was staying at a La Quinta Inn for the time being, and she had learned that there was a bed available for her at the Parkside Drug and Rehabilitation Center in Gahanna, Ohio. A rehab center that had become a very prominent fixture in Ohio since the offset of the heroin epidemic that's plagued this state for some time now. It's been taking people in on an inpatient service for over 20 years, and as their website says, its number one goal is to provide a platform for their clients to begin the process of improving their lives. And this is your formal warning. The next few minutes, or even longer, are going to be extremely troubling to listen to. You have been warned. The next day, August 2nd of 2015, Judy had decided that it was time for her to get to Parkside and finally get help with her addiction. That day, Mike and her got into some arguments as he most likely felt like he was losing control over her. She was soon about to get clean, regain her composure, and find out how fucking horrible of a person Michael had been to her for such a very long time. The first place that they went to was a thrift store. Judy had stolen some clothes from the establishment as she almost had nothing to her name and was living out of plastic bags at the hotel. They then met up with Michael's heroin dealer and picked up an unknown amount of heroin. Judy wanted one final hit before she was about to send herself to inpatient rehab. Michael found a restroom that was safe for her to use in, and he let her go inside and get her fix. She was also carrying around a crack pipe in an empty cigarette pack, but at the time, she didn't actually have any crack in her system or in her possession. After that was when Judy was driven to the Parkside Rehabilitation Center. Mike had dropped her off, and it seemed like he was leaving, but she found someone who was outside the facility smoking a cigarette. She politely asked them if she could bum one off of them, and they had obliged. Before Judy could have entered the building, Judy had word from her mother that she was proud of her, that she was finally going to get help, and told her that she was going to bring her some accoutrements like makeup, hygiene products, and some extra clothes. But the one thing that she wouldn't bring her was cigarettes. Judy was a smoker, and apparently the rehab center would let you smoke on campus. I, personally, can completely understand the need of being under copious amounts of stress and needing a smoke. I don't blame her one bit. Judy had decided that she needed to go get some cigarettes to take in, and for some reason, Michael had pulled back up in his pickup truck, and she had gotten in. But before she had the chance to meet up with her mother, Michael had stopped at a speedway in Gahanna to pick up some cigarettes, which Michael went in to get them. Judy and Michael were having an intense argument at the time, and Judy had snuck out of the truck and ran behind the Speedway gas station. Because of the verbal altercation and her decision not to walk in right away, Judy was scared. There's a lot of times where an addict kind of gets cold feet about checking themselves in, because getting help isn't easy, even as necessary as it may be. When Michael found out, he got into the truck and he tracked her down. He circled behind the gas station and found her. Upon seeing Judy standing behind the building, he slammed his truck into park and demanded for her to get into the truck. She never did, and it was stated that they argued for another 5 to 10 minutes about whether Judy should check herself into rehab or not. A mother of 2 at this point, a cancer survivor, just wanting to get help with an addiction that had been plaguing her for years, and this selfish fucking prick who could only think about himself instead of wanting to better his girlfriend. It's unimaginable. Now finally, Judy had enough of his shit and then tossed a styrofoam cup with soda inside of it on to Michael mid-argument. Considering his checkered past and anger issues, his anger dial was then cranked up to 11. Michael then encircled around to the bed. He had reached into the bed and grabbed a large gas can that was strapped to the side of the liner. After he released the can, he then went to Judy, who had just tripped and fell to the ground while trying to run from Michael, and started to pour gasoline over her head to the point where she was coughing from the smell, which opened her mouth and gasoline started lining the inside of her throat, burning her esophagus and throat in the process. He continued to pour and pour and pour, emptying the gas can and all of its contents onto this 31-year-old woman. As a result of the gasoline burning her throat, she was on her side, coughing up the caustic liquid, trying to breathe. As stated in later testimony, Michael had turned emotionally, mentally, and physically evil. A look of pure hatred, pure madness filled his face. And then he uttered the words,
"You want to throw a cup on me? See what I do to you, bitch."
After he emptied the entire gas can onto Judy, crying out for help, coughing up what she could to clear her throat. She begged. The only words that she could get out was that she would get back into the truck and she would leave with him, and pled Michael not to do the unthinkable. Michael backed up for roughly 30 seconds while Judy continued to beg for help and her life. He then took a lighter out of his pocket, walked towards Judy, and set this daughter, this mother of two, this woman who just wanted to get help with her addiction, on fire, and was soon completely engulfed in flames. An unearthly scream rang out as Judy attempted to remove her gasoline-soaked hoodie from her person and wipe the gasoline away from her face. Michael was described during the incident as resembling Satan's child, who was filled with absolute rage, yet looked eerily calm. While Judy was covered in flames screaming out for help, Michael just stood there, staring at his girlfriend while her hair and flesh were melting away at the intense flames that he had just engulfed her in. The pain of 1,000 hot needles. Eventually, someone had extinguished the flames, and firefighters and paramedics arrived on scene to find this woman still smoldering over 95% of her body, and 70% of these burns were third-degree burns. Judy was rushed to the hospital, and the prognosis was incredibly grim. They had stated that she had roughly 2 hours tops to live. Her injuries were, to say extensive would be, I don't even know. Calling it an understatement would, of itself, be an understatement. Judy was permanently disfigured. But she also lived. How she survived the attack, we may never know. Both of her ears had been burned off. She had lost multiple fingers, her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes were burned off, and she had to undergo over 50, nearly 60 surgeries, including skin grafts, and her heart had stopped, and she coded 7 times through the surgeries, and she was induced into a coma for over 6 months before finally waking up. When she tried talking, she could only whisper because the gasoline in her throat had also ignited and damaged her esophagus. But later she would receive some vocational rehabilitation to try to bring her voice back to normal. Michael was arrested the next day on August 3rd of 2015 and was initially charged with 1 count of aggravated arson, 1 count of felonious assault, and 1 count of possession of criminal tools, because, he was still up to his burglary shit at the time. He was later brought in, and a bond was set at $1 million to keep him behind bars while a further investigation was to take place. Meanwhile, Judy was recovering. She had finally come out of her coma around early 2016. The pain was unbearable as she still had more surgeries to go through. She found out that they had arrested Michael, but the only solace that she had was seeing her 2 daughters, her mother, and her other friends that came to visit her. This woman did nothing wrong and wanted to get on a path to bettering her own life, not just for her, but for her kids, for her mother, and wanted to return to the life that she had prior to her cancer surgery. Michael was losing the ability to control her and manipulate her, to keep her sick, and to keep her under his finger. Now, aside from his time in jail, he watched and supplied this woman with the tools to systematically bring herself down to an addictive, hungry shadow of a woman that she had been prior. She was sick, and by keeping her sick, he held the keys to her life. And then when she wanted out, wanted to get help, his anger took over. He lashed out verbally, hit her physically, and tried to play judge, jury, and executioner with a lighter and a gas can. But her strength and perseverance were the things that kept her alive. Recovery for Judy was not easy. She had been transported to various hospitals to help tend to her wounds. Between the skin grafts, the reconstructive surgery, and the coating, Judy still held on. She had a reason to live, as she still had to feel the love of her 2 daughters, the love of her mother, and still had her own purpose to be carried out. Every morning she woke up, she was immediately greeted with immense pain. Every time that they had to change the dressings on her wounds or skin grafts, she was met with pain. Judy was living the pain almost every second of every day, and while she was giving painkillers to help make it through just one more day, the emotional and mental scars on the inside reflected those of the scars on the outside. But she never stopped trying. She never stopped living, and continued to move through every surgery, every morning of pain, and every moment of life in the chances of seeing her beautiful daughters, loving friends, and incredible family just one more time. For Michael, he pled no contest on December 12th of 2016, and considering that he avoided a jury trial, he was only given 11 years for his crimes. But that wasn't going to be the end of his legal troubles. Not even close. Before Michael's plea of no contest to the charges at hand, the doctors were experiencing a multitude of issues with Judy, and the prognosis was not good. In fact, the prognosis was fatal. The prosecutors of the case against Michael had decided to contact Judy with her story, and her chances of survival were diminishing by the day. She was fighting, but it seemed that this would be a fight that sooner or later she was eventually going to lose. So they spoke with the doctors, spoke with the family, and spoke with Judy, and had given her the opportunity to use her own words, her own testimony, and her own story to hold the keys to Michael's jail cell.
Okay, I'm going to start by asking you your name. Your full name.
Judy Malinowski.
And is Malinowski spelled Malinowski?
That's correct.
Is it okay if I call you Judy?
Yes.
And Judy, is your birth date August 26, 1983?
Yes.
So you're 33 today?
Yes.
Okay.
This was unprecedented, as Judy was still alive, but not well. This video took place on January 26th of 2017, 1 month and 2 weeks later after Michael had pled no contest. But the part of this that was unprecedented was that since Judy's chances of survival were diminishing, she was going to give a full testimony and deposition from her hospital bed to use in her own upcoming murder trial against Michael W. Slater for when Judy eventually would pass away. Michael was stunned that this was even a thing. His defense stated that it was unconstitutional because the prosecution would be the only ones who could get her to testify, but they stated that they wouldn't be able to cross-examine. But the judge made that happen, and for over an hour, using a laptop with Skype, the prosecution and the defense asked Judy for her recount of the day of the attack. They questioned her about her drug usage, her mental state, how she met Michael, his character, and the defense, admittedly, were dicks. But the one thing that they were going to be worried about was the fact that she was still bedridden and was on painkillers for the burns all over her body. So Judy made the conscious decision to stop taking the pain medication days before, so when they asked her if she was of sound state of mind, she could truthfully answer that she was. She woke up day after day in excruciating pain, just for the chance, the minute chance of finally being able to exact her revenge against the man who left her permanently disfigured, laying in bed for over a year and a half at this point, riddled with pain, sadness, and no answers, and finally lock this fucking monster up for the remainder of his absolutely pathetic existence. This man that she had confided in, trusted, who finally lost power and wanted to kill her, would have his life held in the very person's hands that he tried to destroy. Judy gave her testimony, she did her cross-examination, and the record and video evidence was then sealed. In the meantime, the Ohio State Legislature was working on something on behalf of Judy. They had drafted what would become to be known as Judy's Law. Judy's Law is a piece of Ohio law that takes into account domestic abuse situations, and if the abuser uses an accelerant like gasoline or lighter fluid to permanently disfigure their victim, the law mandates that an additional 6 years would be mandatorily added to their sentence with no questions asked. Judy fought tooth and nail for this because when she had an interview with WBNS 10 News, she had stated that, quote, "It destroyed my life, my family's life, my kids' life, everyone around us's life, and the laws of justice are just not fair," end quote. Which she was right. Michael was only given the initial 11 years for the aggravated arson, but that was the maximum sentence that they could legally hand him down. The justice system was failing, and while an additional 6 years is not necessarily a life sentence, it's 6 more years that this person would be behind bars, and their victims could live without that person free from prison. When they asked Judy about her relationship, she stated, quote, "I want to tell people how horrible something like this can be. And if you're in an abusive relationship, find help and get out completely. Run the other way. Run." End quote. And she's got a point. No reason to stay is the best reason to go. And the law can be on your side if you're in an abusive relationship. Your safety, your mental state, and your life can depend on it. Never be afraid to reach out. Never be afraid to ask for help. And never feel like you're going to be stuck in this terrifying relationship, because there is always another option. On June 27th of 2017, after nearly 700 days in the hospital, fighting for her life, Judith Ann Malinowski succumbed to her injuries and passed away at the age of 33. She left behind countless friends, countless advocates, her mother, and of course, her two daughters, Kaylin and Madison. As much as she was selfless before the attack, she never stopped fighting for victims until the very end. Her law was passed and signed by Governor John Kasich on July 27th of 2017. Judy's 13-year-old daughter, Kaylin, had stated, "Our mommy didn't suffer in vain, and her legacy will never die." Her younger daughter, Madison, stating, "She was really brave, and no one should have to suffer like she did." Powerful girls, these two. They continue to carry on their mother's legacy to this day. On October 2nd of 2017, they formally charged Michael W. Slater with the aggravated murder of Judith Ann Malinowski for her death on June 27th of 2017. He had attempted to fight the charges on the basis that she was still alive when he was first sentenced for the aggravated arson and felonious assault, and had petitioned for multiple continuances, but on July 5th of 2018, Michael W. Slater had pled guilty to the charges at his feet as to avoid the death penalty, which is still legal in the state of Ohio. He didn't know that she had been deposed before she actually passed away. But that hour of testimony that he had to watch during his deposition with the woman that he tried to control, tried to keep under his thumb, and the woman that he tried to murder by engulfing her in flames was most likely the longest hour of his entire life. Michael W. Slater was given life with no possibility of parole and will be spending the last remaining years of his pathetic life decaying behind those prison walls, never to make another victim in his wake like he did with Judy Malinowski. Judy's memory lives on through not only the Ohio law, but also through her friends, her family, and the survivors of domestic assault. When this woman wanted help, she was met with an attempt at her life. She left her mark on this world, and for that, I thank Judy for her hard and brave journey to seeing that nothing like this could possibly happen to another victim of domestic violence ever again. Thank you, Judy. Your daughters will carry out your legacy for the rest of their lives and possibly the lives of the children that they may have. Again, if you find yourself in a tough or dangerous position with a significant other, remember that there is help out there. Remember that the National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at thehotline.org, where you can chat with someone who can help you. Or you can call 1-800-799-7233 and can even text LOVE IS one word, to 1-866-331-9474. And if this is a life or death situation, you can call or text 911 to get help immediately. You deserve love. You deserve safety. You deserve everything good in this world. And abuse is not love. There is help for you. And please use it if you need to. Thank you again for your fight, Judy. May you rest in peace. But that's going to do it for this episode. I thank you for listening to this one, and as somebody who has dealt with the trifecta of domestic abuse, and with the increase of domestic abuse cases at the offset of the COVID-19 pandemic, I felt like this would have been no better time to bring this case to the forefront for all of you. But if you would like to help out with the show, you can find the Patreon page at patreon.com/murderandsuch, and you can donate just $1 an episode and help fund the back end of the show, get some exclusive perks, stickers, audio clips, and get the show early and ad-free. And of course, you also get my undying love and support. And if not, you can use the Apple Podcast app, and if you could drop me a 5-star review, I will be forever in your debt. Still trying to hit that 500 review milestone, but with your help, I will get there eventually. And I would love to thank my executive producers for this episode, such as Casey Jones, Angel Renee, Brad Hyatt, Kyle Wesley, Ashley Collier, Natalie Stern, Laura McDonald, Jenna Kagawa, Jax Dorian, Martha Pierce, Alex Aguirre, Justin Reebsum, McKenna Johnson, Ariel Safir, Stacy Jenks, Dan Sheridan, Benjamin Welch, William T. Dawson, Sarah Thompson, Rambo Stanley, Lacey Velasquez, Erica Summers, Danielle Longamore, Heather Wright with the Nature vs. Narcissism and Ohio 88 podcasts, Big Daddy Thick Dick, Dakota Curtis, and of course, Ashley Black and tech support. And if you'd like to follow the show on social media, you can find it on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Murder and Such. And if you would like to follow me, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, the PlayStation Network, Snapchat, and Steam at Huntor27. But as always, I thank you again for being here. I thank you so much for listening. I love each and every single one of you. Don't forget to wear your mask, wash your filthy goddamn hands, call somebody that you love today, and until next time, I will talk to you soon. Take care.